we're here today because we're going to talk about coelacanths. Now, I have written a book all about coelacanths. It's called Fossil Fish Found Alive. And I'm going to kind of tell you some background of the story about coelacanths because, you know, some people think science is boring. But if you realize, I love science too, but you know, if you realize that sometimes parts of science are like stories, they're not boring at all when you start thinking like that. So I'm going to kind of tell you about coelacanths, and then we'll take some time for questions. Well, let's hold questions for a few minutes, and then we can kind of get some time. Back in the 1920s and the 1930s, and even before that, people had found fossils of a fish. You know what a fossil is, don't you? Okay, the hardened remains of an extinct animal. Okay, well, people had been finding fossils of an unusual kind of fish, and they named these fish ceolacanthus. Ceolacanthus means hollow spine, and that's because these fish had hollow spines in the fin that was on their back. Well, all of the scientists that had ever studied coelacanths never found any fossils that were younger than 70 million years ago. So, if you don't find a fossil that's any younger than that, and you don't find any when you go out fishing, you start to think, well, I think this fish is extinct. And that's what everybody in the entire world believed until December 22nd in 1938. And back then, what happened was a lady named Marjorie Courtney Latimer, she was a young curator in a museum in South Africa, got a phone call one day. And it was from the captain of a ship that had given her specimens in the past. And he said, Marjorie, we got some fish down here on my deck. You might want to come down and see if there's anything good here for your museum. Well, Marjorie was busy working on a new dinosaur exhibit for her museum, and she really didn't want to go down there. But this captain had been nice to her in the past, so she figured, okay, I'll go take a look. Well, she took a taxi cab down to to the fishing dock nearby, and she went onto the boat. She saw this huge pile, sharks, stingrays, starfish, and they didn't interest her at all because Marjorie had seen that type of fish tons of times. She was just about ready to go when all of a sudden she saw this blue fin sticking out from the pile. Well, she went over, she moved the sharks that were on top of it, and she saw this brilliant blue fish. The fish was this long. The fish looked like this. Now, this is what a coelacanth looks like, but you can see that they're much bigger than this. As a matter of fact, a baby coelacanth is about this size. Well, Marjorie saw this weird fish, and the first thing that she noticed about this weird fish was that it had scales on it that had spines on them. Well, that was really unusual. You know, and neither had Marjorie. She was totally surprised. The next thing she noticed was that at the end of the fish's tail, there was this little tiny extra tail. She called it a puppy dog tail because it reminded her of the tail that you'd find on a little tiny baby puppy dog. And nobody has ever seen that on a fish before. What was really weird were the fins on the fish. And here's the fin of the fish. This is called a pectoral fin. It's a fin that's up where the fish's chest area would be. I'm going to show you a bigger picture of that. This is a bigger picture of that. No fish today have fins like this. It's called a lobed fin. Kind of reminds you more of a leg with a fin instead of toes. Upside down. Nope, it's the right way. The regular fish that we would have like a goldfish in your fish tank at home would have fins like this. And you can see there's no big leg-like part to it. So Marjorie saw this fish and she decided she would bring it back to her museum. And she went out to her taxi cab driver there. She had an assistant with her, and he helped her lug it off of the ship. And she brought it out to the taxi cab driver, and he looked at it, and he said, "You're not putting that fish in my car." And she said, as a matter of fact, he even told her it was a stinky fish. And Marjorie said, "This is not a stinky fish. It was just caught a few hours ago." And she said, "If you don't let me put this in your car, I won't pay you." So he said, "All right, fine, you can put it in the trunk." So they put the fish in the trunk. Marjorie took it back to her museum, and she wanted to try to identify it. She looked in every single fish book that she had, and she had a lot of them in her museum. She couldn't find it anywhere. Then she remembered something that she learned when she was in school, and she remembered her teachers talking about fossil fish that had scales that were hard, like that fish's scales were. Well, Marjorie knew that her books couldn't help her for this. What would you do if you looked in every single book that you could find and you couldn't find your fish? What would you do next?
I'd find a scientist that knows a lot about fish.
You'd find a scientist that knows a lot about fish. A scientist who knows a lot about fish is called an ichthyologist. Can you say ichthyologist? Ichthyologist. Well, she happened to know one. His name was Dr. Smith. And Marjorie called Dr. Smith's office, and Dr. Smith was gone. He was away on Christmas vacation, 350 miles away. Marjorie didn't know that at the time, so she left a message for him. This was in the days before there were answering machines. And then she wrote him a telegram and told him that she found this really unusual fish. Well, in December in South Africa, it's summertime. It's the exact opposite of here. And the temperature was in the 80s or 90s or maybe even hotter. And she had this great big 4.5 to 5 foot long fish. There's no air conditioning at the time in South Africa. What do you think started to happen to the fish? Yeah? It started to dry up, and almost worse, it started to rot, exactly. Okay, what would you do if you had a great big fish and it started to rot? What would you do? How about over here?
Put it in some water.
Put it in some water. Wouldn't help because the fish will continue to rot even in the water, believe it or not. Things decay in the water. How about back there in the striped shirt?
Stuff it.
Stuff it. Very good idea. Marjorie wasn't going to try that at first because when you stuff a fish, like for people mount them sometimes on the wall, maybe you've seen animal heads on the wall or stuffed fish on a wall, when you do that, you have to take the insides out. And Marjorie wanted to try to keep the insides safe. So before she was ready to stuff it, she thought she'd try something else. And how about right there with the gray shirt?
Freeze it.
Freeze it. Now, in South Africa in 1938, there were only 2 freezers in town that were big enough to be able to handle a fish that big. One was at the hospital, and it was in the morgue. Now, a morgue is a place where they keep dead human bodies. And Marjorie put her fish in a wheelbarrow, and she wheeled it down the sidewalk to the hospital's morgue, and she said, "Can I put my fish in your freezer?" And the hospital director took one look at that, and he said, "You're not putting that in there with my people. No way." Well, the second place where they had a freezer was at a big place where they kept like cold storage for restaurant-type foods. So Marjorie went there, and the man there also said, "No way, you're not going to put it here either." So that's when, as you suggested, Marjorie thought of a taxidermist, a person who stuffs fish. So she went to a man named Robert Center, and he started to stuff the fish for her. Well, they had something called formalin. Formalin is a preservative. It keeps animal meat from rotting, but they didn't have enough of it. And they tried to do the best that they could, but they couldn't keep all of the insides. And after about 10 days, and still no word from Dr. Smith, Robert Center, who was the taxidermist, had to throw away the insides. Well, finally, Marjorie got a telegram from this very famous ichthyologist, Dr. Smith, and he said, "Sounds important, save innards," the inside parts of the fish. Well, Marjorie went to the dump to even try to look for them. But back then, what they did was they would take garbage and dump it out in the ocean, take it out into the ocean and dump it. It had already been dumped. So there was no way she could get the insides. Dr. Smith, on the other hand, had studied coelacanths when he was in school. So he knew a lot about them, and he knew there were none anymore, anywhere in the world. So he was really excited because Marjorie had drawn him a picture of what this fish looked like. The other thing, you're in science camp right now. You know that when you're going to prove something scientifically, you have to have, very often, if you want to make sure that you can prove it to somebody else. Say I caught a coelacanth today, and I couldn't take it with me. If I wanted to prove to somebody else that I'd actually caught one, what could I do? Yeah, in the back there. Draw a picture, or even better, take a picture with a camera. Marjorie was a good scientist, so she took a whole roll of pictures of the coelacanth. And she was excited when she heard from Dr. Smith because she knew she had the pictures. And then she went to the photographer, and he had dropped the roll of film, and the whole roll was ruined. So she had no proof at all. All she had were the scales and, of course, the skin, the stuffed fish. But Dr. Smith was really excited about this fish. But he didn't want to tell Marjorie what he thought it was, because if he was wrong and said this was a coelacanth, that would make him look like a fool. So he didn't want to do that. He had to wait, because he was so far away from her at the time, he had to wait for like 3 months before he actually got to the place, the museum where Marjorie had the fish. And when he did, he started crying. He was so excited about it. When it was identified as a coelacanth, it made headlines all over the world in newspapers. They had headlines on there, things like, bigger find than the Loch Ness Monster. They had things about fossil fish, that's where it kind of started, fossil fish found alive. They also were talking about maybe, one of the things that Dr. Smith had noticed, of course, about the coelacanths is these particular fins that I showed you, the lobed fins, when Robert Center, the taxidermist, mounted that fish and stuffed it, what he did was he did it with the fins up here pointing downward so that the coelacanth looked like it actually stood on its fins, like it could walk that way. I do have a picture of that first coelacanth along with Marjorie. Here's a picture of it and her. And you can kind of see how the fins are pointing downwards. So Dr. Smith figured, well, it probably walks along the bottom of the ocean stalking prey. Now that kind of thing upset a lot of people because they didn't want to think that fish could walk. That was a whole argument about evolution at the time. People were very, very concerned about that as a topic. Well, once Dr. Smith had this coelacanth, he took it home with him, and he studied it for a couple of months before they actually put it on exhibit in the museum. When they did, 20,000 people came to see the fish the first day because they were so amazed at this find. If you were Dr. Smith and wanted to find out about the insides of the coelacanth, and all the insides were gone, and there were no pictures of any of the insides or anything like that, what would your next job be? Let's see, how about, oh, back there in the orange shirt.
You'd catch another one?
Catch another one, exactly. So
But
that's
they're very rare.
exactly, and you know what? He found out how very rare they were. He started walking with his wife Margaret all over South Africa at the docks, asking different people, have you seen the coelacanth? He would have pictures of the one that I just showed you. Has anybody seen one? Has anybody caught one? He and Margaret walked over 100 miles. They probably walked 500 miles trying to find another coelacanth, and they couldn't find one.
Just because of fish, they walked 100 miles?
Oh, they walked probably 1,000 miles by the time they were done. Yep, he really wanted to find another one. And finally, what Dr. Smith ended up doing was making a reward poster. And he tacked this up at a lot of the different wharfs and docks all over South Africa. And it was basically offering 100 pounds. That'd be a lot of money today. 100 pounds is English-type money or South African money. And it would be more like offering somebody, oh, today, like $2,000, something like that. So he had a lot of reward posters made up to look for another coelacanth. He didn't find another coelacanth for 14 years. So it was a fish hunt that lasted 14 whole years. And it wasn't until a fisherman called, or a trader called Eric Hunt actually found one. And that was in a place called the Comoro Islands. Now these are off the coast of South Africa. This is a picture of Eric Hunt. And when Dr. Smith,
He was so young.
yeah, he was at the time. And when Dr. Smith found, heard that the next coelacanth came, guess what? It was at Christmas time again. And Dr. Smith, this time, was like hundreds and hundreds of miles away from where the coelacanth was. And of course, they had no refrigerators there. The man that found it, Eric Hunt, did have some formalin because he had seen the Smiths before that and said, what do I do if I find a coelacanth? And they laughed and they said, well, chances are slim, but have some formalin. And he said, what if I don't have enough formalin? And Margaret Smith laughed even more, and she said, put salt on the fish. Salt will also help preserve it. That's what he had to do, actually. But when Eric Hunt contacted Smith, Smith had to get there quickly. Now, in those days, you couldn't just call an airline and get a plane ride. They didn't have planes that just flew over there. It was Christmas time. He called the government to see if he could borrow a plane. Everybody was on vacation. Finally, what he had to do was call the equivalent of the president of South Africa and ask if he could get a special government plane to fly and get that coelacanth. And that's what he did. This is a picture of the plane that he actually took to go get that coelacanth. And one of the things that I thought was neat was that when he found this coelacanth and actually brought it then to his home, he was so afraid it would get stolen or lost that he slept next to it. And here's a picture of him sleeping right next to the coelacanth. Now, coelacanths are really cool fish for a couple of different reasons. First of all, they're about the only fish that have lobed fins, the ones that look kind of like feet. They have a very strange organ inside their head. It's called a rostral organ. If you could imagine a fish with two nostrils on the tip of its nose, coelacanths have nostrils, but they also have 3 little holes on each side of their head. And those little holes are tubes, and they're filled with jelly, and they go all the way down inside the coelacanth's head to this rostral organ. No other fish in the whole wide world has a rostral organ. Another thing about coelacanths, nobody has ever been able to keep a coelacanth alive once they get it up to the top of the water. Every single coelacanth that has been brought up dies. And the biggest mystery, the biggest of all coelacanth mysteries, is that nobody has ever found a baby coelacanth. We have no idea where they live at all. Now, I've been kind of talking for a while. Why don't I give you a chance to ask some questions? I know some of you've got them. Let's see, how about over here in the blue shirt? Yeah.
Are there any coelacanths in captivity?
There are no coelacanths in captivity because even still, no matter what, when they get a coelacanth, it dies. None have survived. How about here in the blue shirt?
I have this one book about this fossilist, Mary, and I was wondering if she would have been Mr. Smith's wife.
Mary Anning, who collected?
Yeah.
Is that it? Mary Anning actually lived in England, and she was born in 1799, so she wasn't related at all, but she loved fossils as much as Dr. Smith did, that's for sure. How about over here?
You said that it was almost one of the only fish with lobe fins. Do you know the names of the other ones?
There is a fish that still lives now in parts of South America and in a couple of other places in the world called the lungfish, and they do have kind of lobed fins that are somewhat like that. How about right here in the red shirt?
Have divers ever touched one?
Have divers ever touched a coelacanth? Divers have not actually touched a coelacanth, but people have touched them, and it was it was an accident. Mostly, people believed coelacanths would only be found in the Comoro Islands, which, as I told you, are off the coast of South Africa. Well, one day, a young man and his wife, Mark and Arnaz Erdman, who live in Indonesia, were in the marketplace there, and Arnaz saw this cart with a big fish on it. And she thought, wow, that's kind of cool. So she borrowed a camera from a friend to take pictures of this fish. Well, Mark Erdman studies fish. That's one of his jobs. He looked at the fish and he thought, whoa, this is a coelacanth. I know what this fish is. This is back in 1998. So it's 60 years almost, 40 years plus since Marjorie found her coelacanth. And basically, he decided, well, nobody seems interested in it here, so that they must find them all the time here. And he just decided, well, I'll take some pictures of it. And it turned out that no one had ever reported a coelacanth in Indonesia before. And what happened is they had to go on a fish hunt, just like Dr. Smith did, handing out leaflets and pictures to fishers in Indonesia, asking them, has anybody ever caught one of these fish? And one day, Mark and Arnaz were sitting at their house. Their house had kind of a beach in front of it, and they got a knock on the door. It was it was an Indonesian fisher. And he came up and he said, come on down. I got something in my boat that I think you'll find interesting. And it turned out it was a coelacanth, and it was still alive. So what Mark and Arnaz did was they hooked it up to a rope on their boat, and they pulled it through the water. They were trying to see if they could save this fish's life. They swam with the coelacanth then for about, an hour and a half or so before it finally died. So they did touch the coelacanth. Other divers have not touched them, and of course now coelacanths are protected so that you don't want to interfere with them if you can avoid it. Let's do some questions over here. How about there with the stripes?
How long have you been researching the coelacanth?
I researched coelacanths about 6 months before I actually started writing the book. And then it took me about, 3 months perhaps to write the book. And then after that, we do the revision. I know most of you in school talk about revision and revising work. The whole time that I was revising the manuscript, I was still researching more. What was kind of neat is when I was studying coelacanths, I had to do a lot of reading of scientific journals and papers, plus I also had to talk to scientists who study coelacanths. And that's when I used email. It's really helpful because the scientists that I had to talk to all live in places like Germany, France, South Africa, Indonesia, and email made it real easy. Now, I told you about Marjorie. Marjorie is still alive, the lady who found the first coelacanth, Marjorie Courtney Latimer. She's 95 years old. And I wrote her a letter. She doesn't have a computer, so I had to use snail mail. And I wrote Marjorie a letter asking her questions about what it was like to find that first coelacanth. And then she sent me back a wonderful letter. This is one of my real treasures. And since then, I've written to her a couple of times. But to know that I've actually communicated with the person who made what some people have said is the greatest animal find of the whole 20th century, that's really pretty neat. Let's see, how about up here? You have a question. What do coelacanths eat? Coelacanths eat fish, other fish in the ocean. And the interesting thing is no scientist has ever seen a coelacanth catch food. There have been, since Marjorie's coelacanth was caught, there have been about 200 coelacanths that have been caught, all accidentally. Coelacanths are not caught on purpose, and it's illegal to catch them. How do you think scientists could learn what fish ate if they've never seen them eat? Anybody got any thoughts on that? How about right back there?
You could look at their organs and tell what they ate.
Exactly. Look at their organs. They cut open the stomachs of dead caught coelacanths to examine and see what they've been eating. And they found out that they eat deep water fishes, basically fish that live in water that's, say, anywhere from 300 down to about 600 or 700 feet deep. And they tend to eat fish that are about this big. They eat squid, stuff like that as well. How about here in the blue shirt?
Has anyone ever eaten coelacanth?
Yes, some of the folks who live in the Comoro Islands have eaten coelacanths, but one of the interesting things about coelacanths is they have very, very oily skin. If you could look at your muscles under a microscope, you would see that in your muscles you have lots of little air spaces. And those air spaces, that's sort of what helps us float when we're in the water. If you looked at a coelacanth's muscles, it's totally filled with oil. There are no air spaces anywhere in a coelacanth. So coelacanths, they don't really. They stay right wherever they want to be in the water. So they're very, very oily fish, to answer your question. And the people that have eaten them have said they're not particularly good. And it tends to make you feel kind of queasy afterwards, so people don't usually eat them. How about back there in the blue and the yellow?
Well, I was just wondering if do some scientists say that coelacanth is part of the endangered species?
Yes, coelacanths are endangered. They are on the endangered species list, which means it's against the law to catch them or trade in them anywhere. As a matter of fact, if somebody catches a coelacanth, they have to report it to the government of wherever they are, and then it gets saved for science purposes. How about back there with the glasses?
How big does a coelacanth get?
Coelacanths, for a long time, they didn't think they got all that big, other than what Marjorie's was at about 5 feet. But just last year, 2001, some divers in South Africa, they were called trimix divers. These are divers who go in extra deep water with scuba gear on, and they were down at about 300 feet, and one of the divers, Peter Venter, looked up, and here on the shelf, the rock shelf under the water in front of him, is a fish that he thought, my gosh, I don't know what that is at first, and then he realized it was a coelacanth. They'd never found them in South Africa either at this point. So he was real excited. You know, he kind of had to come back another time with cameras to take pictures of it. What was your question again? How big? And that's right. And I knew there was a reason I was going with this direction. When he came back the second time and was filming the coelacanths then, they actually found the largest coelacanth that's ever been spotted before, and it was 6.5 feet long. So big. I mean, I'm 5'3", so a 6.5 feet coelacanth would be like this from the floor up. Really, really big. How about you?
Do coelacanths swim fast or slow?
Coelacanths are interesting fish. They don't like to use energy at all. They like to conserve as much energy as they can. So what coelacanths do is they drift along the bottom. And that's how they hunt. They're called drift hunters. They just let the water currents pass them along and push them across the bottom until they find a fish that they want to eat. And then, if they're scared or if they're darting after a fish, they can put on this like quick burst of speed. But then as soon as they're finished with whatever they're doing, they sort of settle down and go slow again. So you could probably, on the whole, run faster than a coelacanth would be able to swim. How about we do some questions over here in the middle now? Striped shirt.
Has anyone found a fossil of a coelacanth?
There have been lots of fossils found of coelacanths, and that's one of the neat things about coelacanths. Coelacanths, all fish in general, started showing up on Earth about 500 million years ago. Coelacanths started showing up in the fossil record about 400 million years ago. And what's weird is that coelacanths fossils, the ancient ones that used to live 400 million years ago, look very much like the coelacanths that are still alive today. Now, in ancient times, coelacanths came in a lot of different sizes. They lived in a lot of different places. They lived in saltwater, freshwater. Some were only like 10 inches long when they were fully grown. Others were big. So that it's been kind of an interesting way for scientists to learn about studying fish through fossils, because they've got this wonderful collection of coelacanth fossils that they can look at. And then they make guesses, like scientists are now making guesses about dinosaurs. What did the dinosaurs eat? Where did they go? How did they run? They guess, right, and they guess that from fossils. And to find a real coelacanth, they could say, whoa, our guesses looking at the fossils were right. We can prove it by looking at the real coelacanth. How about back there with the gray shirt? Yep.
Have you ever seen one?
I have never seen a live coelacanth. To be able to go and see them live, you would have to be able to either, one, go in a submersible, a mini submersible. It's kind of like a mini submarine. And there's a group of scientists who do study the coelacanths with mini subs. I actually have a picture in here of the mini subs that they study them with. It's a submarine called Yago, J-A-G-O, and it's actually named after the smallest kind of shark. But they can use these to study them. Or the other way to study living coelacanths is to be a trimix diver. And that's so technical, and it's a very dangerous kind of diving. As a matter of fact, I was telling you that Peter Venter dove and looked at the coelacanths and was surprised. When he came back with cameramen later, a couple of months later, they went down and they looked for the coelacanths again, and they found them. When you trimix dive, you go down slowly to the bottom because you don't want gases to build up in your blood. And basically, your air time or your bottom time when you're diving in a trimix diving situation is only about 12 minutes because it takes you like an hour and a half to slowly come back up again from 300 feet down. If you don't go slowly enough, you will get something called the bends, and it could kill you. Well, what happened is, it was very sad, one of the cameramen who went down with Peter Venter and filmed the coelacanths in South Africa didn't come up slowly enough, and he got the bends and he died that day. So it was very, very sad. So that's the only way you could find coelacanths, basically, is if you're in one of those two settings. But how about Richard?
If you were to guess how many coelacanths you think are, like, alive?
Alive? Well, they're around the Comoro Islands. They know that there are a couple hundred there, certainly. Indonesia, they did, the Yago ship that I showed you, went and looked there, and they found 2 live ones. There could easily be more. We don't know. The South African divers spotted 10 to 11 of them. So we don't know all the places that coelacanths could be. I would certainly say it looks, I mean, they are endangered. You could probably say 500, but there could be more in places that we haven't gone. We just don't know. How about with the shirt with the flowers there?
Has anyone found a coelacanth in the United States?
You know, it's weird. Back in the 1940s, a lady in Florida sent a coelacanth-like scale to a museum director up in the Washington area. And he identified it as being a coelacanth scale. He'd seen pictures of Marjorie's coelacanth, and he knew what it was. But when they tried to track and she said she had a whole barrel full of them. And this was in Florida. But when they tried to track the lady down to see, to find out, examine them more closely, nobody could ever find her. So whether she found something in that area, we don't know. Or whether someone had traded and the barrel of scales had come from somewhere else, no one knows. It's more people would have to continue to explore and see. Coelacanths do seem to like areas where the water would be warm, like it would be near Florida. But you'd think if there were too many, well, Florida may not be deep enough in some of the areas, but you'd think that maybe somebody would have turned one up by now. They haven't. How about back there in the gray shirt?
Do coelacanths lay eggs?
Do coelacanths lay eggs? That was a scientific debate that raged for years because, and the reason it raged was because scientists had found in the coelacanths that they captured, they had found some coelacanth eggs. I have a picture here of some coelacanth eggs. Let me just see if I can quickly find it here. This is the inside of a coelacanth that was dead, and they've cut it open. You can see some ball-shaped objects inside the coelacanth there. Those are eggs. Now, yep. Now, a coelacanth egg is bigger than any other fish egg. Coelacanth's eggs will get to be this big, the size of a grapefruit. So scientists had found pregnant females, and they thought, okay, they must lay eggs. Well, then somebody found a fossil of a coelacanth, but there were 2, like, mostly grown babies inside the fossil. So they said, well, no, they must have live babies. They actually have discovered that what coelacanths do is they have eggs inside their body that grow until the baby, shortly before the baby is born. And then the shell around the egg, around the growing baby, dissolves. and the babies are actually born live. Now this is a coelacanth pup that was taken. Coelacanth babies, by the way, are called pups. Coelacanth pups have a yolk sac attached to their tummies, and that's how they get their nourishment while they're growing inside the mom. And this is a coelacanth pup that was taken out of a female coelacanth who had been caught. She had about 19 babies that were growing inside her at the time, but of course she was dead. Yeah, right here in the middle.
Do you think they could get any bigger than 6 feet?
If they could get bigger than 6 or 6.5 feet, you know, I don't know. We just don't know if they get bigger than that. If you had asked somebody 4 years ago, could they get bigger than 6 feet, they might have said no. But now they found one that's 6.5 feet. So that might be about as large as they might get, but you just don't know because we don't know so much about them. How about right here?
How do they catch food?
How do coelacanths catch food? Again, that's something that scientists don't exactly know, but they can only guess at. And they guess by looking at the coelacanth's bones. Coelacanths are weird. Your jaw, if you open your jaw for a minute, it goes like down, right? Okay, coelacanths have a funny jaw, or a funny joint on the top of their head, so that the top of their head actually can tip upwards. Instead of just their jaw will go down, but the top of their head will actually go upwards too. And coelacanths are the only fish alive anywhere that have this kind of jaw, or this kind of joint in their skull. So they think that coelacanths kind of drift up to where the prey is, and then they open their mouths really suddenly. And you know how if something opens really suddenly, it creates like suction? And they think that might be enough to help pull prey into the coelacanth's mouth. But nobody has ever seen a coelacanth eat, so all they can do is kind of guess. Right back there. Yep.
Has their place in the food chain ever changed since they were way back?
I would say no. They're probably, basically the only animals that really are going to prey much on coelacanths while they're living would probably be a couple of different kinds of sharks, maybe. And then they eat, of course, fish themselves. So is that what you mean?
Well, did any other sort of prehistoric beast eat them?
Yeah, you know, as a matter of fact, yes. Did any of you see the exhibit at the Field Museum, or not the Field Museum, the Science and Industry Museum of Super Croc? That great big 40-foot-long crocodile? Okay, they ate coelacanths. So certain fish that lived during dinosaur times and reptiles that lived then, if they came down by the water, when there were lots of coelacanths, they would have been eaten by the big guys as well. How about right here? Oh, behind you.
Do you know what Dr. Smith did with his coelacanth that he caught?
The one that Dr. Smith had, now that I think about it, no. It must be in a museum someplace. And I know where Marjorie's is, but I don't know where Dr. Smith's is. I'll have to write and ask one of my friends where it went. That's weird. That's a good question. I hadn't thought about that. How about the black shirt?
Were the rest of the coelacanths found near Christmas too?
No, they found coelacanths the rest of the time. It's just those first 2 coelacanths, for some reason, were caught by Christmas time. That's one of the things that Dr. Smith said when he got the telegram the second time and he couldn't get anybody to find him a plane. He just said, why do coelacanths have to come up at Christmas time? So, okay.
That means why don't they just send, like, when they're looking for coelacanths, why don't they just like go to the bottom and look for them all the time?
Well, you know, it's interesting because the people who pilot Yago, that submersible that I showed you, they figured, okay, they must be deep down in the bottom because they would track the coelacanths. At first, they couldn't find any when they first went to look for them at the Comoro Islands, and this is back in 1987. They went there to find coelacanths, and they took their diving mini subs down, and they couldn't find a coelacanth, no matter what. They looked and looked and looked. Well, finally, they asked one of the fishers, the Comoran fishers, and they said, where do you find the coelacanths? And the fisher said, well, the first thing is we only ever catch them at night. So right away, the scientists knew, okay, we got to stop looking in the daytime, we got to look at night. So they started doing night dives then to find the coelacanths. And they found, they had seen some coelacanths being active going up and down. Coelacanths live near cliffs. They could, in the Comoro Islands, they're lava cliffs made of old volcanic material. They live along and hunt along those cliffs. So they figured, well, okay, we don't see them in the day. They must be way down at the bottom. So what they had to do was build a stronger submarine that could go deeper. They did that, came back a couple of years later, went all the way down to the bottom, and didn't find any coelacanths. What they found was down on the bottom, there were basically no places for coelacanths to hide. So they figured, okay, they must be somewhere else in the daytime. Well, they knew that there were a whole bunch of caves on these cliffs, but they figured big fish like coelacanths, they won't go inside caves, so we won't look there. But then, one time when they were coming up from the bottom, they shined a light into one of the caves, and there were like these glowing circles flashing back at them. And it turns out that coelacanths live in caves in the daytime, and that's where they hang out. Let's do some questions over here on this side. How about the orange shirt?
Have coelacanths ever been found in really deep lakes?
Have coelacanths ever been found in really deep lakes? Not any live coelacanths now. It seems that all the coelacanths today are marine coelacanths. That means coelacanths that live in salt water. Marine means salt water. But in ancient times, they did live in lakes. They lived in fresh water. So they have fossils of coelacanths that lived in lakes. Good question.
What's the extra organ in its head for?
Well, that's another mystery, the rostral organ. One of the things that the divers in the mini sub Iago found was when the first time they ever saw a coelacanth, they were surprised. It was night diving. They shined a light over. They saw the blue. They knew exactly what the fish was. And as they got closer and watched this fish, all of a sudden, it did a headstand. And they thought, whoa, why is this fish doing a headstand? Well, when they went back and looked at the coelacanths another time, they found that it seemed like every time they got something connected to electricity near the coelacanth's head, which is where the rostral organ is, the fish started doing the headstands. They think that the rostral organ is used for sensing electrical pulses of some sort. Now, whether that would help them find prey, because animals, when our muscles work and the energy that we use inside our bodies is produced, it makes electrical current in our bodies. And that would be like a coelacanth prey as well. So maybe the rostral organ is sensing electrical impulses. They still don't know exactly what it does. Yeah.
How long do coelacanths live?
That's another kind of a neat thing, because you know, if you get a goldfish and you bring it home, they don't last very long. Coelacanths, it seems, can live up to 100 years old. And maybe, you might ask, how do scientists know that? Well, you know how when you cut a tree down, you can count the growth rings in a tree? Okay, coelacanths have bones inside their ears. They're called otic bones. And otic bones get growth rings on them, just like a tree trunk does. So by counting the growth rings in an otic bone, they can figure out how old a coelacanth is. So it looks like 80 to 100 years old, way in the back.
How do we know that these coelacanths that they found aren't like evolved ones from the fossils?
Well, they're not the exact same ones. They're not the same, like, right now, if you had a golden retriever dog, that's not the same dog that lived 400 million years ago in the sense it's the same breed. The coelacanths that are alive now are not the same species of coelacanths that lived 200 million years ago. They're a different species of coelacanth. Yeah. Yeah.
Are there any coelacanths like in museums around here anywhere?
The Field Museum in Chicago has a model of a coelacanth. Because coelacanths are endangered, for a while, museums all over the world, you know, as soon as a coelacanth had been accidentally caught, and all coelacanths have been caught accidentally, as soon as one word came out that one was caught, all of the museums all over the world would zoom in on that place and say, oh, we want that. We want a coelacanth for our museum. What they've started to do to try and prevent people from wanting to get ones is to make really, really good models of coelacanths. That's what the Chicago Museum, the Field Museum, actually has, is a model of a coelacanth. They may have coelacanth fossils, too. I'm not sure about that. But the model is downstairs in the Field Museum. I've been there and seen it. Yeah?
When a coelacanth is like hunting for its prey, when it gets to it, does it just swallow it, or does it bite it first?
Okay, that they know the answer, that they do swallow them down whole. Coelacanths only have little teeny teeth, like they're scattered throughout the top of their, or front of their jaw. They don't have big teeth like a shark, or rows of teeth like a shark does. They have small teeth, but very sharp. And they just big, oh, well, here, let me see if I can get this picture real quick here. They do. They use it to snatch, and their teeth real quick clamp down, and then they kind of gulp the food down whole. You can kind of get a sense looking at this. Their mouths are really large. They gape open. They gape pretty wide open so that they kind of gulp the prey down whole, and that's kind of what they do. So their mouths do open quite wide. Let's see, we'll do one more question over here. Yeah?
Where are coelacanths at daytime?
Where do coelacanths go in the daytime? That was the mystery until the submarine went up the lava cliffs and by accident shined that light in there. And they found that coelacanths come out at night, they hunt up and down the cliffs, and then as soon as sunlight starts coming through the water, they head back to their caves. And they live in caves all day long. They've seen as many as 10 coelacanths in a cave at a time. The coelacanths don't seem to communicate with each other. They just stay there, motionless, conserving energy in the caves all day long. Let's see, one over here.
What's a coelacanth enemy?
Enemies? Well, people, of course, would be an enemy, and certain sharks also would eat coelacanths as well if they would catch them.
And when one's found by accident, does that, like, do they set it back, or do they give it to a museum?
Well, if a coelacanth is caught by accident, and there again, people have gone out and tried to catch coelacanths, and it's an accidental thing. You can't go out and deliberately fish for coelacanths. First of all, it's against the law to do that now, but nobody ever caught one on purpose. What they do with a coelacanth, there isn't any way they can preserve it. People have actually tried building tanks on the bottom of the ocean so that if a coelacanth was caught, they could put it in the tank and try to keep and save it that way. They've tried taking them back down into deep water. None of those things work. No matter what scientists do, they can't keep coelacanths alive up at the surface. And they do know why that is, and I can get into that a little bit later if somebody wants to ask it. How about back there in the striped shirt?
Wouldn't the fishermen be the first one to find the coelacanth?
They are. And when I say that Dr. Smith or Eric Hunt found the coelacanth, actually, it was a Comoran fisher who found the second one. He was a gentleman whose last name was Abdallah, and he was a Comoran fisher. He caught the coelacanth at night in about 520 feet of water, brought it back, was getting ready to skin it so that he could gut it and everything. He would bring it to the market and sell it anyway, when all of a sudden, a teacher of all people who was in the Comoran Islands, another Comoran person whose last name was Muhammad, he had seen that reward poster, and he recognized this fish that Abdullah was getting ready to cut up as a coelacanth, and he knew, whoa, there's money here if we don't cut this fish up. And he said, wait, stop. And that's when he contacted Eric Hunt, who brought the coelacanth to Dr. Smith then. So yeah, it's always been either Comoran fishers or Indonesian fishers, except for the case of the South African diver who came upon them live there. It's always been like a native fisherman who's found the coelacanths. How about back there in the blue and yellow?
Do coelacanths fight?
Do coelacanths fight? They don't seem to. They don't even seem to touch each other. They just sort of stay still. The only times they've ever seen a coelacanth actually touch another coelacanth was if a fin accidentally brushed against one, and it's like they've had to use stop action camera type thing to be able to see that. The contact has been like less than a blink of your eye, so really fast. Yeah, the white shirt.
They says the coelacanths live under the ocean, then it must be dark, and does that mean the coelacanths have like some kind of other cells that no other fish has?
In the dark there, to be able to see? They do. Do you know how cats can see really good at nighttime? Cats can see good at night because their eyes have a special layer of cells. It's called a tapetum. Can you say tapetum? Tapetum, good. And basically, it's like having a mirror inside your eye. And the light, the dim light, shines on the tapetum, and that actually reflects the light back out again. And it's like the coelacanth can almost see things twice, so they can see really well in the dark. They probably can't see color the way we can see color, but they can see very well in the dark. Let's see over here. How about in the blue shirt back there?
How long was the shortest coelacanth?
You know, I don't know about of the ones that they've caught in modern times. I know the smallest species that they'd found fossil-wise was less than 10 inches, so that there were some really bitty ones. How about back in the way back there?
Are like coelacanths like vicious? Like if they felt threatened by a human, would they try to like attack it?
He wanted to know if coelacanths are vicious. When I was doing the research, I did write letters to Mark and Arnaz Erdman. Arnaz is the one whose picture I showed you swimming with the coelacanth. And they both wrote back and said they did not feel afraid of the coelacanth at all. It basically seemed very gentle to them. Since the coelacanths don't do a whole lot of hard swimming, I think they're probably pretty slow-moving things. Now, if a coelacanth was hungry and you were a fish this big, they might come after you, but they don't seem to be vicious at all. How about right here with the glasses?
When do coelacanths like mate?
Nobody knows when coelacanths mate. They've never seen either. They've never observed coelacanths mating. They've never found to know how long that the babies were going to grow inside them. So they just don't know the answer to that. How about up here in the front with the yellow?
Is Dr. Smith still alive?
No, Dr. Smith died in the 1970s. He had cancer, and he died. So, yeah, white shirt.
What kind of teeth do they have?
What kind of teeth do they have? They're teeth about this big, and they're really thin and pointy, and they're kind of scattered in groups, a couple of at a time, throughout the mouth. So they're not, not a huge amount of teeth. Yeah.
Have they found like different species of coelacanths?
So far, all we have found are 2 species. One is called Latimeria cholumna. Now, Latimeria, the lady who found the first one was Marjorie Courtney Latimer. So Dr. Smith named that fish Latimeria in honor of Latimer. And Cholumna, that was the river where they caught the fish. The second species that we have found is the Indonesian species that Mark Erdman found. And that one is named after the area in Indonesia where it was found. So so far we know there are. And we'll have to see if there's any more than that. We'll just wait and see.
The sensors, you said that they sense electricity. Are they like great white shark? Are they like the ones that great white sharks have?
No, it isn't the same. I mean, they use they have those ampullae of Lorenzini for the great white sharks where they can sense that. It's not the same kind of thing because the coelacanth, similar in sensing electrical current, but it's not the same kind of organ. The coelacanth's organ is a rostral organ, and it is totally unique. Nobody else, no other fish has one like it. Way in the back there with the blue soccer shirt.
Has there been any other events like the coelacanth, like where a fish was thought to be dead for a long time? But
I can't think of any offhand where they thought something was extinct and then it turned out alive again. I can't think of one off the top of my head. Red shirt.
Has any person ever been attacked by a coelacanth?
No, not that I know of. Not that anybody that I've ever read about. How about blue shirt with palm trees?
On TLC once, I saw this like show of a submarine, and it was a submersible, and it was going over like rocks on the ocean floor. Do you think that could have been the one that you're talking about?
It could possibly be. I know there are more than one, certainly, of these mini subs. Yeah, and it was really neat because in writing to the people who actually built that and made it, one of the questions I asked them, because they're not that very big, and I said, do you feel scared when you're down there under the water, 300, 400, 500 feet deep in this little teeny sub? And the lady that responded, because one of the team is a woman, her name is Karen Hissman, she said no, she's not, she doesn't feel in danger at all. She said she feels safer in the mini sub that deep than she does driving in a car on the street. And she said there's just plenty of room for them to they can either sit or they can kind of lie down and watch. They've got windows to look at the coelacanths through that and through other things. They don't only explore for coelacanths, they explore for other things as well. How about the bluish shirt there?
I have 2 questions. One, how did you get the picture for the cover of the book?
This cover on the cover is from Mark Erdman. It's the same one that the lady was swimming with that ultimately died, and I got it from them. They let us use it.
And my second question is, how come they can't, like, with the tanks,
Okay, why don't coelacanths stay alive? For a long time, scientists thought that it was because they couldn't stand the sunlight, or that it was bringing them from a higher pressure place under the ocean up to lower pressure at the top of the sea. The reason, actually, there's 2 reasons. One is because, think of a fish breathing, how they breathe first. We all know they breathe with gills. Okay. Now, a lot of fish have large gills. Yeah?
Breathe oxygen in the salt water.
They get oxygen from the salt water, and what they do is, coelacanths have very small gills. They're really small for a fish their size. So they have trouble getting enough air in their mouth, through their gills. Okay, now, the second reason is when a coelacanth struggles, like it's caught on a hook, it's a certain kind of waste product that builds up in your muscles. It's called lactic acid. Sometimes you'll read about runners, marathon runners, who all of a sudden at the end of the race drop dead. Sometimes that's from too much lactic acid building up inside your muscles. So when a coelacanth is caught and it struggles really hard, the lactic acid builds up in its muscles, and that makes other systems in its body start failing. If you combine that, think about when you go out in gym and you run really hard. Do you breathe very slowly when you're finished running? No, you breathe really hard and big breaths. Okay, with a coelacanth, because their gills are so small, after that hard struggle and all that lactic acid building up, they can't breathe enough. Their gills will not bring an oxygen in fast enough, so they suffocate. It's suffocating and lactic acid, and that kills the coelacanth. If somebody could, let's pretend, first of all, it would be illegal to catch a coelacanth, but if somebody could go down and get a coelacanth where it lives and bring it up without catching it on a hook, slowly, maybe it would survive. because the lactic acid wouldn't build up then, but we don't know that yet. How about right here?
Do you know where Margaret's coelacanth is after she put it in the museum?
It is still in the museum. It's still right in the museum where she first brought it when she took it off of the dock. It's right there.
Own that museum still?
She's retired now. She still lives nearby, and in the last time I got a letter from her, she said, oh, I hope sometime you could come to South Africa and see that coelacanth. It's still there. So, yeah.
Was the coelacanth fun to research?
The coelacanth was a lot of fun. I mean, these are weird, ugly kind of looking fish, but somehow you just get so captivated in their story. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I really enjoy. I would love sometime to be able to go to South Africa and see the first one that Marjorie had found, and I'd love to be able to talk to some of the scientists who actually swum down where they are. I think that would be just great to go in one of those mini subs and go down there and look at one, but haven't had a chance to do that yet. Red shirt.
I have two questions. The first one is, how do you tell the species apart?
The species, they do that now with DNA testing. You've heard about studying DNA. And that's how they distinguished Marjorie's coelacanth from the ones in the Comoros as opposed to the Indonesian ones. Now, the ones that were just found in South Africa, the people from Yago, the German scientists who have that mini sub, just were back there last month. And when I got just a note the other day from Karen Hissman, and she said, well, we collected some scales off of the coelacanths that we saw there. And we're going to take the scales and sample them for DNA to see if they're the same species as the ones that are in the Comoro Islands. So it's all very sophisticated genetic testing, and that's how they prove it. How about the one blue stripe?
I have two questions. What is the oldest coelacanth that they've found?
That I don't know. All they can, it's a range of 80 to 100 years is about what it is. Okay. How about you?
Do you know how many coelacanths have been found?
Well, over 200 have been actually caught that have died. So they do keep a record every time one is caught. But I don't exactly know what the head count of the live ones that they found anymore. It kind of changes as they find more. How about over here in the red shirt?
What made you write this book?
What made me write this book? I had learned about coelacanths when I was in college. I studied geology then, and I had a professor who one day said to me, I got this really neat book to show you, and it was written by J.L.B. Smith, Dr. Smith, and it was all about finding that first coelacanth and then the second one. So then I just thought about it as I got older, and I thought, wow, there's nothing out there for kids about coelacanths. This would be a cool thing to write about, and that's why I chose it. Blue shirt.
When coelacanths die, do they float up to the surface of the water as regular fish?
You know, I wanted to ask that question, and I hadn't thought about it until just recently. Coelacanths, because they have so much oil in their bodies, they stay pretty much whatever level they are in the water. They don't float. The oil keeps them, it's called being buoyant. So if a coelacanth is, here's the surface of the water, here's the coelacanth, it doesn't have to work to stay at this level. It just kind of stays there. If it moves its tail, it can move up to a different level and it kind of stays there. Or if it wants to go down, it stays there. So I'm going to guess that when a coelacanth dies, it probably stays fairly close to the bottom area. But I'm glad you brought that up because I do want to ask about that. I have a friend that I still email, and I want to check that out with him. Good question. Because you'd think that maybe the gases inside it as it rots would make it float, but then why don't we find more dead ones? Or if they die inside their caves, maybe they can't float to the top. I don't know. Yeah, and they're stuck down underneath there. You just don't know. So, yeah.
Why can't they just like have an underwater cage where they like put the cage over it and it wouldn't struggle?
Well, I think mostly because right now we think coelacanths are so endangered that we don't want to catch another one, because if you catch one and take it out of the water, that's one less coelacanth that can have babies. If scientists ever find baby ones, maybe a baby would be easier to take out. But you'd want to make sure that there were enough babies around that, you know, you didn't damage the future population. Babies are easier to move. First of all, they're smaller than adult ones. And also, babies seem to be more flexible than old people. Maybe you've heard somebody say, oh, my bones are so old, I can't get out of the routine I'm in right now. You kids can change around. Well, maybe it's easier for baby coelacanths as well. Let's see, we'll do a few questions over here. How about right there?
Oh my God.
Yeah. How much do coelacanths weigh? They can weigh up to a couple 100 pounds. So they can be pretty heavy. Is your hand up? No? Okay. Yeah.
Have scientists tried to like put a thing around
a part of the coelacanth to track it down? Like
Yes, the people from Yago, the ones who have the mini subs, they actually have done radio tagging of coelacanths to actually sound wave where they are. And here's a picture of one of the darts. They made special darts that they could put into the coelacanth's scales. They were designed so that they would fall off after a few weeks and they wouldn't hurt the fish. And they used these to track the coelacanths to see where they went during the daytime and where they went at nighttime when they hunted. So that is one way that scientists do track them. And they can monitor that from a boat up on the surface. How about over here in the blue shirt?
Is your book like a reference book on coelacanths?
No, I would say my book is kind of, you know, my sister, when she read this book, she said, oh, you know, Sally, this is nonfiction. And we always know, we know that nonfiction means true story. She said, it's nonfiction, though, that reads like a story, like a novel. So I like to think of it as a cross between that. Everything in here is totally true, but I'd like to think that I wrote it interestingly enough that someone will pick it up and want to keep on reading because they want to know what happens. Yeah?
Do coelacanths eat sharks?
Do coelacanths eat sharks? I think they'll eat baby ones if they can get them, but they don't go out and hunt after sharks. I mean, big ones. They don't go out hunting big sharks. Let's see, we'll do 2 more questions, and I think we're pretty much out of time. So how about in the brown shirt there?
Do coelacanths have eyelids?
No, not that I'm aware of. I don't think they do have eyelids. And let's see, we'll do one more. How about right here with the blue stripe and the white?
2 questions.
Okay.
Has anybody heard a coelacanth like sing or talk to another coelacanth or something?
Oh, have to communicate? One coelacanth communicating with another? No, no one's heard them make any sounds. And if they communicate with other coelacanths, they don't know how they do it. Scientists have never seen, like sometimes you see, oh, I don't know, lions might rub against another lion to say hello or something like that. They've never seen coelacanths interact with one another like that. So they don't know how they communicate. If they do, they just don't know.
Another question is, I forget it.
Oh, okay. Well, then we'll do one more question right next to you because you forgot it.
How did the coelacanths get their name?
How did they get their name? Good question. Coelacanthus granulatus was the first identified fossil one. Coelacanthus is 2 Greek words that mean hollow spine, because the hollow spine in their fin on the back. And granulatus comes from the grainy texture, the spiky texture on their skin.